So, if the blockade in fact posed no threat to Israel, and in fact there was no blockade, and the Arab armies posed no threat to Israel, why did it go to war? The answer is not difficult to find. At that time, there was this fellow named Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he had all of these ideas of what was called back then radical nationalism, which basically meant that the Arab people should have the right to control their own destiny. And he was making all of these defiant gestures to Israel, culminating or climaxing in May 1967. Mr. Nasser and then the Arabs were getting too uppity, and it was time to put them in their place. At that time, one of the Israeli commanders was a fellow who then went on to become Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. And he told the Israeli cabinet that if we don't attack, Israel would lose its deterrence capacity. Our main weapon, the fear of us. And that was the goal, to restore the fear of us in the Arab world. One of Israel's leading scholars, a fellow by the name of Ze'ev Ma'oz, he recently wrote in his book that Israel attacked in June 1967 to restore the credibility of Israeli deterrence. Restore the credibility of Israeli deterrence, that's the fancy technical term for restore the fear of us in the Arab world. Now, as it happened, this problem with restoring the deterrence capacity reappeared on the scene in May 2000, when Hezbollah expelled the Israeli occupying army from South Lebanon. Israel suffered a humiliating defeat, and it was a defeat that was celebrated throughout the Arab world. The Arabs were getting uppity again, and it was time for another war to put them in their place. Israel almost immediately began planning for the next round with Hezbollah, and in summer 2006, it found a pretext. Although Israel unleashed the fury of its air force and geared up for a ground invasion, in the summer of 2006, it suffered yet another ignominious defeat. One military analyst, very sympathetic to Israel, nonetheless concluded, and I'm quoting him, the Israeli Air Force, the arm of the Israeli military that had once destroyed whole air forces in a few days, referring obviously to June 67, this Air Force not only proved unable to stop Hezbollah rocket strikes, but even to do enough damage to prevent Hezbollah's rapid recovery. But what about that famed Israeli army? Once the ground forces did cross into Lebanon, they failed to overtake Hezbollah's strongholds, even those close to the border. Now Israel had a real problem on its hands. Its credibility, its deterrence capacity, its ability to inspire fear in the hearts and minds of the Arab world had slipped another notch. After the 2006 war, Israel was itching to take on Hezbollah again, but up until now, it hasn't had the military option. In 2008, Israel sought to conscript the United States for an attack on Iran, which it hoped would also decapitate Hezbollah and thereby humble the main challengers to its regional hegemony. Israel and its unofficial emissaries like Benny Morris, the Israeli sometime historian and full-time propagandist, worried that if the U.S. did not go along, and now I'm quoting Mr. Morris, who in the United States is considered a left-wing historian, he said, then Israel will have to use non-conventional weaponry, that is to say, nuclear weapons, and many innocent Iranians will die. Not that he cares. Well, to Israel's chagrin and humiliation, the attack on Iran never happened. Iran has gone its merry way, and Israel's deterrence capacity slipped one more notch. What to do? It was high time to find a defenseless target to annihilate. Enter Gaza, Israel's favorite shooting gallery. Even there in Gaza, the feebly armed Islamic movement Hamas had defiantly resisted Israeli diktat, and in June 2008, even compelled Israel to agree to a ceasefire. Gaza was now the target. Now the question was, how do you transmit the message? How do you restore the fear of us? And Israelis planned, or had a clear plan on how to proceed. During the Lebanon War, they completely flattened an area in the south suburb of Beirut called the Dahiyya, known as the Dahiyya. I visited it more than a few months ago, about 3/4 of a year ago, and the place looks like a moonscape, where once there were fairly tall buildings, there were now just craters. And Israelis were very thrilled by the results of what they did in Dahiyya. And the past year, the Israeli military officials began to talk about the Dahiyya strategy. What is the Dahiyya strategy? Well, I'll quote the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces Northern Command Chief. We shall pulverize the 160 Shiite villages in Lebanon that have turned into Shiite army bases. We shall not show mercy when it comes to hitting the national infrastructure of a state that in practice is controlled by Hezbollah. In the event of hostilities, another reserve colonel said, Israel will act immediately, decisively, and with force that is disproportionate. Such a response aims at inflicting damage and meting out punishment to an extent that will demand long and expensive reconstruction processes. This Dahiyya strategy, as Israelis conceived it, would be applied to all of its adversaries, to the Lebanese, who they say are all Nasrallah, to the Gazans, who are all Khalid Mashal, and to the Iranians, who are all Ahmadinejad. Well, Iran and Lebanon, for now, were not available targets, so the first testing ground for the new Dahiyya strategy was going to be Gaza. And the plans, the exact plans, can be seen from the authoritative statements of Israelis as this massacre got underway. One reserve general said last week, what we have to do is act systematically with the aim of punishing all the organizations that are firing the rockets and mortars, as well as the civilians who are enabling them to fire and to hide. The official Israeli spokesman of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, said, anything affiliated with Hamas is a legitimate target. And the strategy worked to striking effect. In the Lebanon war, in the first 2 days, Israel killed about 55 Lebanese. In the first 2 days of the current massacre, what the Israelis like to call, in the current context, their shock and awe, it killed about 300 Palestinians in the first couple of days.